The Blue Jewel.
Chapter 10. Part 1. During the Age of the Damned, White Robes grew in power until it was considered as the best magic order in all of Mercenaries thanks to action of its great patriarchs so skilled with magic and politics. Historia Magica. Alphonsus Caldinus. The return trip to Olbiana was longer, the currents were not favorable, in addition the ship had lost a mast, it was totally charred, Captain Labres ordered it to be cut down to avoid greater evils. The journey lasted for 10 days in which Arian was dedicated body and soul to the care of Aris, who quickly recovered from her injuries, thanks to the triumph of Elaban. The water that touched the jewel heals all kinds of wounds. The sailors were so surprised that Arian had the jewel immersed in 4 large carafes filled with water so that they could have a miraculous water reserve, a request to which the young woman gladly agreed. While Agnorak sat with Kush, and between them they managed to draw in Kush's book the glyphs they had observed in the temple. Gosberg also made his observations on the work of the two, and quite accurate indeed. They were greeted by the great harbour of Olbiana. Now Arian understood that it was a copy of the great harbour of the Cursed City, a copy of worse quality than the original. From what he was told, after the fall of the Cursed City, the elves abandoned Olbiana and men occupied the city, creating from that base the Jewel of the South. The ship docked in the harbour and they said goodbye to Captain Labres and his crew, who received a large payment for their services, just enough to compensate for the loss of the mast. The mercenaries were greeted by a young wizard who was Ferdinand's assistant, who was ordered to bring them into the presence of the council as soon as possible. In an unprecedented decision, everyone rode horses to the protest of the orcs and the dwarf, except Sabu, who would have to run, but he who pays rules, and now the members of the council were in a huge hurry to get their hands on the jewel. The wizard went to pay for the horses. Aris whispered something to Gosberg, who nodded his head. Quickly, as if it were a wisp of wind, he approached Arian and stroked the young woman's hair and whispered to her, "Give me the jewel now." Before Arian reacted, Gosberg left calmly, searched in the pockets of his robe. The jewel was missing, it had been stolen by the Denka. She was about to scream when Aris grabbed her. "Trust us. You stole my jewel. It is a mere precaution, and in less than 3 days it will be in the hands of the Magi." These explanations did not calm the young woman, who decided to do the rest of the trip in the company of the Kendali without talking much. The trip, which should have been one of happiness and joy for having fulfilled a complicated mission, however, everyone was in a tense calm, unlike on the outward trip, where conversations with the magician were fluid and carefree. The nights, although affable, were not as before. A black cloud hung over them. They finally arrived at their destination. As always, the city of magic was a hive of people. Agnorak and Gosberg occupied the last position behind the huge Denka. They let themselves be guided by the magician, who chose a different route. Instead of going along the main avenue, they took their way through narrower and darker streets. "Did I think we should go to the headquarters of the Council of Mags?" Arian was surprised. "It's our destiny, but the Magi think it's better to go down a more discreet path." Arian remained silent. The procession advanced through the avenue and unexpectedly turned to get into a dark alley, with totally black walls without windows. The atmosphere in that place was nauseating. There was a lot of tension in the air. Arian felt the same as in the ambush of the Brown Hills. Gosberg lagged far behind than usual, Aris putting her hand behind her back. An arrow was inserted into the heart of the magician who accompanied them on behalf of the Council of Magicians. He screamed in pain and fell from his horse to the ground. "Attention, ambush!" Aris shouted as she drew her sword. There was no time. Arian saw how Gosberg, thanks to his separation from the rest of the group, managed to escape from the alley. Agnorak covered his escape. Arian understood Aris' plan. She had gone ahead of them, but she saw nothing else except a black smoke that covered that gloomy place. Arian fainted. Aris saw the smoke, and as his companions fell prey to him, thanks to his advanced position, the smoke did not reach him. Though he spurred his horse and went out to the exit of that accursed alley, he could see the building of the Great Council of Magicians in front of him. The person who had prepared the ambush had everything planned in a perfect and calculated way since his horse fell violently to the ground, pulling him by his saddle. Despite the blow, Aras quickly sat up and observed the cause of his fall. It was a rope stretched 10 centimeters from the ground. His companions lay unconscious within that black cloud. The smartest option was to get out of the alley to avoid the black cloud. A figure that came out of nowhere blocked his way. He was completely dressed in black. She was tall and corpulent. The figure shook his head when he saw Aras attempt to escape. "I'm sorry, I must insist that you accompany your companions to their destination." The figure had an emotionless, elegantly speaking voice and was moving forward slowly, as the black cloud slowly dissipated. "I won't be away for long as it takes for the cloud to dissipate." The man drew a sword. Aras smiled. That fool wanted to die and moved forward. Then he realized his tremendous stupidity, stopped in his tracks, and under his gaze he had activated the mechanism of the trap. He had trusted himself. A kind of green mass completely flooded him and prevented him from moving as he fell to the ground. "Black General, you have fallen into my trap." Aras raised his head as best he could. Now he could clearly see his opponent. He was tall, very tall, with long limbs, a white forehead and large grey eyes. On his face 2 huge scars ran vertically all over his face. He gloated until Agnorak appeared in the shadows, ready to end this on the fast track. His opponent did not back down. He did not seem particularly affected. "Agnorak, you and I had unfinished business." "Jumal, what are you doing so far from Arcio?" Jumal did not answer as usual for him. He only raised his hand and a dozen archers appeared from the rooftops and windows. "Sorry Agnorak, our unfinished business has to wait. Accept your defeat." The half-orc knew when to accept defeat. If these mercenaries wanted them dead, they would already be together with the goddess Thani and her black petunias. He dropped the sword. Jumal smiled, walked slowly towards Agnorak and gave him a big blow in the face, leaving him unconscious, but to make sure he threw more kicks at the half-orc. Aras watched as Jumal hit Agnorak, but at the same time received a blow to the head, leaving him also unconscious.